The arena was a place of blood and fear, its walls slick with the sweat of countless warriors who had come before. It was a circular pit carved into the earth, surrounded by towering stone steps that rose high into the sky, packed with roaring spectators hungry for violence. The air vibrated with their chants, a cacophony of voices demanding battle, demanding death. At the center stood Kale, a human man with scars etched deep into his skin like maps of battles fought and won. His chest heaved as he steadied himself, his grip tightening on the hilt of his sword. He wasn't afraid. Fear was a luxury he couldn't afford. Kale had been taken from his home planet years ago, plucked from the chaos of war and thrown into this alien world where humans were seen as nothing more than beasts to be tamed or destroyed. To them, he was a savage, a creature without honor or reason. But Kale knew better. He carried the weight of humanity's dignity in every breath, every swing of his blade. And today, under the blistering sun and amidst the deafening cries of the crowd, he would prove it once again. As the gates across the arena groaned open, Kale felt the familiar rush of adrenaline coursing through him. This time, however, something was different. Instead of another brutish gladiator or monstrous beast lumbering toward him, a figure emerged that made even his hardened heart pause. She was tall, her lithe frame clad in armor that shimmered faintly under the light. Her hair cascaded down her back in fiery waves, and her eyes burned with an intensity that could rival any flame. She was an alien warrior woman, one of the fiercest races known across galaxies, a people whose strength and ruthlessness were legendary. Her name was Zareen, though Kale wouldn't learn that until much later. For now she stood there, her gaze locked onto him, assessing him like prey. The crowd erupted into cheers, their excitement palpable. They expected a clash of titans, two apex predators tearing each other apart for their entertainment. But what they didn't know, and what neither Kale nor Zareen fully understood yet, was that this fight would change everything. Zareen stepped forward, her movements fluid and deliberate, each step resonating against the hard-packed dirt of the arena floor. Her weapon gleamed menacingly in her hand, a curved blade designed not just for killing but for inflicting pain. Kale watched her carefully, noting how her muscles coiled beneath her armor, ready to strike at any moment. Yet, despite her imposing presence, there was something else in her demeanor, a flicker of hesitation that betrayed her confidence. She wasn't here willingly. Kale recognized the look in her eyes because he'd worn it himself countless times before. Beneath the veneer of defiance lay fear, not of him, but of what awaited her if she failed. The stakes were higher than mere survival. Failure meant shame, disgrace, perhaps even exile from her own kind. These thoughts raced through her mind as she circled him, searching for an opening, a weakness to exploit. But Kale didn't move. He simply stood there, his sword resting easily in his hand, waiting. "Do you think I fear you?" Zareen finally spoke, her voice cutting through the din of the crowd like a whip. It was sharp, commanding, yet laced with uncertainty. "You are nothing but a human, an animal bred for slaughter." Kale tilted his head slightly, studying her. "And yet," he replied calmly, "you hesitate." Her jaw tightened, and for a brief moment, her composure faltered. She lunged suddenly, her blade slicing through the air with deadly precision. Kale sidestepped effortlessly, letting her momentum carry her past him. He didn't counterattack immediately, choosing instead to let her wear herself out. Each strike she delivered was powerful, fueled by desperation, but also reckless. Kale parried with ease, his movements economical, controlled. He wasn't fighting to kill. He was fighting to survive, yes, but also to understand. The longer they exchanged blows, the clearer it became that Zareen wasn't entirely focused on the fight. Her attacks lacked the calculated ferocity he'd come to expect from seasoned warriors. There was raw emotion behind them, anger, frustration, maybe even regret. With every clash of steel, Kale saw glimpses of the person beneath the warrior facade. She wasn't invincible, no matter how much she wanted to appear so. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zareen stumbled. Her foot caught on a loose patch of ground, and she fell to one knee. Instinctively, she raised her blade to defend herself, but Kale didn't press the advantage. Instead, he stepped back, lowering his sword slightly. The crowd booed and jeered, dissatisfied with his lack of aggression, but Kale ignored them. His focus remained solely on the woman before him. "Why do you stop?" Zareen demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and confusion. "Finish me. Prove to them that your kind is capable of cruelty." Kale shook his head. "I'm not here to prove anything to them," he said quietly. "Least of all that I'm cruel." For the first time since entering the arena, Zareen truly looked at him. Not as an opponent, not as a threat, but as a person. What she saw confused her. His face bore the marks of countless battles, but his eyes held none of the malice she had been taught to expect from humans. Instead, they were filled with something softer, empathy, perhaps, or pity. It unsettled her. "You're wrong about us," Kale continued, his tone steady. "We're not monsters." Zareen's grip on her blade loosened ever so slightly. Her mind raced, trying to reconcile what she saw with what she had always believed. Humans were supposed to be savages, incapable of mercy or compassion. Yet here stood one who refused to strike when victory was within reach. It defied everything she thought she knew. Before she could respond, a roar erupted from the stands above. A group of spectators hurled insults at Kale, screaming for him to finish the fight. One particularly loud voice bellowed, "Show her the truth of your kind." The words stung, not just because they were directed at Kale, but because they echoed the lies Zareen had grown up believing. Lies that seemed increasingly hollow the longer she stared into Kale's unwavering gaze. "I can't," she whispered, so softly that only Kale could hear. Her shoulders slumped, and for the first time, the mask of invincibility slipped completely. Tears welled in her eyes, though she fought desperately to hold them back. "I can't do this." Kale took a cautious step closer, his sword still lowered. "Then don't," he said gently. "You don't have to." Her breath hitched, and she glanced around frantically, as if expecting someone to intervene, to drag her away and punish her for showing weakness. But no one came. The crowd continued to shout and scream, oblivious to the quiet exchange unfolding below. In that moment, Zareen realized something profound. She was alone. Truly alone. No one would save her. Not her people, not the merciless overseers of the arena, not even the gods she had prayed to since childhood. But then, neither was Kale. Despite being surrounded by thousands of hostile faces, he too stood alone. And yet, he chose kindness over cruelty. Mercy over vengeance. Why? How could someone endure such suffering and still offer compassion to an enemy? "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why aren't you killing me?" Kale hesitated, considering his answer. "Because," he said finally, "I've spent my life proving things to people who will never see me as anything more than a monster. If I kill you today, I become exactly what they think I am. And I refuse to give them that satisfaction." His words struck a chord deep within her. All her life, Zareen had been told that strength was measured by dominance, by the ability to crush those weaker than oneself. But here was a man who embodied a different kind of strength, one rooted in restraint, in choosing not to act out of hatred or fear. It was foreign, terrifying even, but undeniably compelling. Slowly, painfully, Zareen lowered her blade. The metal clattered against the ground, the sound reverberating through the arena like a declaration of surrender. She bowed her head, unable to meet Kale's eyes. "I beg for mercy," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the din of the crowd. "Please, spare me." Kale exhaled deeply, the tension in his body easing slightly. He extended a hand toward her, palm up, an unspoken invitation. "Get up," he said simply. "We'll face this together." For a long while, Zareen didn't move. Her mind wrestled with conflicting emotions, shame for yielding, gratitude for being spared, confusion over what came next. When she finally reached out and grasped Kale's hand, it wasn't just a gesture of acceptance, it was a spark of hope igniting between them. Together, they rose to their feet, standing side by side as the crowd's outrage reached a fever pitch. What happened next would alter the course of both their lives, and perhaps the fate of their worlds, but neither could foresee it yet. All they knew in that moment was that they had chosen a path less traveled, one paved not with blood and conquest, but with understanding and courage. The silence between Kale and Zareen stretched taut, fragile as glass, as they faced each other in the aftermath of her plea. Around them, the arena seethed with unrest, the crowd's anger palpable, their shouts growing louder, more frenzied. Yet neither flinched. Their eyes remained locked, searching, questioning. Zareen's hand still rested in Cale's grasp, warm and steady despite the tremor of uncertainty running through her. For the first time in her life, she felt exposed, not physically, but emotionally. Vulnerability was a concept alien to her, something she had been trained to disdain. And yet, here she stood, stripped bare before a man who should have been her enemy. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice low but clear, cutting through the noise. Her golden eyes flickered toward the masses above, then back to Cale. There was no accusation in her gaze, only a desperate need to understand. Cale tightened his grip on her hand slightly, offering reassurance without words. "Now," he said, his voice firm yet gentle, "we decide whether we let them control us, or if we take control ourselves." He gestured subtly with his chin to the crowd, their faces contorted with fury and disbelief. Some pounded their fists against the stone benches, others hurled vile epithets down at them. A few pointed weapons, mimicking executions with exaggerated motions. The message was clear: they expected bloodshed, and anything less was unacceptable. But Cale's resolve did not waver. His stance radiated calm defiance, a quiet rebellion against the spectacle they had demanded. Zareen swallowed hard, her throat dry. "They will not forgive this," she murmured, her voice tinged with dread. "Neither my people nor yours. We have broken their rules." "Yes," Cale admitted, nodding slowly. "But sometimes rules are meant to be broken. Sometimes, doing the right thing means stepping outside the lines they draw for us." Her brow furrowed as she processed his words. Right and wrong had always seemed so black and white to her, a rigid code ingrained since birth. Strength equaled superiority, weakness equaled inferiority. Mercy was a flaw, compassion a liability. Yet here was Cale, challenging everything she had ever believed. His actions defied logic, shattered convention, and yet, they felt oddly liberating. "But why?" she pressed, her voice rising slightly. "Why risk everything for me? You owe me nothing. I would have killed you without hesitation if given the chance." Cale's expression softened, though his gaze remained unwavering. Because mercy isn't about owing someone something. It's about recognizing that everyone deserves a chance to choose differently. Even you. His words struck a nerve, sending a shiver down her spine. Recognition dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by guilt. She thought of all the lives she had ended without question, all the battles she had fought without remorse. Was it possible that she had been wrong all along? That the lessons drilled into her from childhood were built on falsehoods? "I don't know how to live this way," she confessed, her voice trembling. "This softness. It feels unnatural." Cale chuckled softly, the sound carrying a warmth that eased some of the tension in her chest. "It's not softness," he corrected. "It's strength. Real strength doesn't come from domination, it comes from knowing when not to dominate." Zareen blinked, absorbing his words like drops of water in parched soil. Slowly, she straightened her posture, squaring her shoulders as though preparing for battle. Only this time, the fight wasn't against an opponent, it was against herself, against the conditioning that had shaped her entire existence. "Teach me," she said suddenly, surprising even herself. Her voice carried a newfound determination, fierce and unyielding. "Teach me how to be strong like you." Cale studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "It won't be easy," he warned. "People will hate you for it. They'll call you weak, a traitor. Are you ready for that?" She nodded without hesitation. "Yes." The conviction in her voice sent a jolt through him, reigniting a spark of hope he hadn't realized he'd lost. Perhaps this moment wasn't just about sparing a life, it was about forging a new path, one that could ripple outward and reshape the future. Together, they turned to face the crowd, their backs pressed firmly against each other. Cale raised his sword high, catching the sunlight, while Zareen retrieved her blade from the ground, holding it aloft as well. The gesture was simple but powerful, unity in defiance. The crowd's reaction was immediate and explosive. Boos turned to shrieks, insults to threats. Someone threw a rock, narrowly missing Zareen's head. Another followed, striking Kale's shoulder with a dull thud. Still, they stood firm. "We can't stay here," Kale muttered under his breath, leaning slightly closer to Zareen. "Not if we want to survive." "I know," she replied, her voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. "Follow me." Without another word, she bolted toward the nearest exit, dragging Kale along with her. The crowd surged forward, spilling into the arena in pursuit, their cries echoing like thunder. Guards stationed at the gates moved to intercept, their weapons drawn, but Zareen and Kale fought as one, their movements synchronized in a way that seemed almost instinctual. Every swing of their blades was precise, every dodge calculated. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving, fueled by a shared purpose that transcended fear. As they broke through the final barrier and disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors beyond, the roar of the crowd faded into the distance. Their breathing came in ragged gasps, their bodies slick with sweat and blood. But neither stopped moving. Neither dared to look back. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zareen allowed herself a fleeting smile. "Where do we go now?" she asked, glancing at Kale. He met her gaze, his own lips curving upward in response. "Anywhere but here," he said. "Somewhere we can start over." And with that, they ran faster, deeper into the unknown, leaving behind the arena, and the lies it represented, forever. Through the dimly lit tunnels, Kale and Zareen pressed onward, their footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls. The air grew heavier with each passing moment, thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient decay. Shadows danced eerily in the flickering torchlight, and the distant hum of machinery hinted at dangers lurking ahead. Yet neither slowed their pace. Survival was their sole focus now, and trust, the fragile bond forged in the arena, was their only guide. "You're leading us somewhere specific, aren't you?" Kale asked, his voice low but steady. He kept his sword at the ready, scanning their surroundings for any sign of ambush. Zareen nodded sharply, her eyes darting ahead as she navigated the maze-like passages. "There's a hidden route beneath the city. Few know of it, fewer still dare to use it. If we can reach it, we might stand a chance of escaping unnoticed." Kale arched an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. "Hidden routes, secret exits. You've got quite the arsenal of tricks." A faint smirk tugged at her lips, though it quickly vanished. "Tricks are all I have left," she muttered. "Everything else has been stripped away." The comment hung between them, heavy with meaning. Kale wanted to say something reassuring, to remind her that she wasn't alone anymore, but words felt inadequate. Instead, he matched her stride, their shoulders brushing occasionally as they moved in tandem. The connection between them was still raw, untested, but undeniable. They had saved each other in ways neither fully understood yet. Suddenly, Zareen froze, holding up a hand to signal Kale to stop. Her sharp intake of breath was barely audible, but it carried urgency. Ahead, the tunnel split into 3 separate paths, each darker and more foreboding than the last. From one of them came the faintest sound, a metallic scrape, like claws against stone. "They're here," she whispered, her voice tight with alarm. "Hunters." Kale's grip tightened on his sword. "How many?" "Too many," Zareen replied grimly. "If we engage, we won't make it out alive." Kale scanned the options, his mind racing. "Then we bluff our way through. Which path leads to the exit?" Zareen hesitated, her gaze flicking between the tunnels. Finally, she pointed to the middle one. "That one. But it's also the most heavily guarded." "Perfect," Kale said dryly. "Let's go." Before Zareen could protest, he stepped forward, raising his sword high. With a loud shout, he slammed the flat of the blade against the wall, creating a deafening clang that reverberated through the tunnels. The hunters' attention shifted instantly, their guttural growls drawing closer from multiple directions. "What are you doing?" Zareen hissed, panic edging her voice. "Buying us time," Kale shot back, already retreating toward the chosen path. "Move." Zareen obeyed, sprinting after him as they plunged into the shadows. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder, punctuated by snarls and the clatter of armored feet. The narrow passage twisted and turned unpredictably, forcing them to duck and weave to avoid collisions. At one point, Zareen nearly tripped over a jagged piece of debris, but Cale caught her arm, steadying her before she could fall. "Stay close," he urged, his tone urgent but calm. "We're almost there." Moments later, they burst into a cavernous chamber, its ceiling lost in darkness. A single beam of light pierced through a crack far above, illuminating a rusted grate set into the floor. Zareen wasted no time, dropping to her knees and prying at the edges with her blade. The metal groaned in protest but eventually gave way, revealing a steep ladder descending into blackness. "Go," Cale ordered, gesturing for her to climb down first. "I'll cover you." Zareen hesitated, torn between gratitude and indignation. "Don't play the hero," she snapped. "We do this together." Cale grinned despite the gravity of the situation. "Fine. Together, then." Side by side, they descended into the abyss, their descent marked by the distant echoes of their pursuers. Just as Zareen's boots hit solid ground, a volley of projectiles whizzed past them, embedding themselves harmlessly in the walls of the shaft. Cale cursed under his breath, swinging his sword wildly to deter anyone foolish enough to follow. Once they were safely inside the lower tunnel, Zareen sealed the grate behind them, securing it with a makeshift lock fashioned from fragments of the broken mechanism. The hunters' frustrated roars faded into the background as the duo pushed onward, their path illuminated only by the faint glow of bioluminescent moss clinging to the walls. For a while, they walked in silence, their exhaustion evident in their labored breathing and sluggish movements. Eventually, Zareen broke the quiet. "Why did you insist on staying behind me?" she asked, her tone softer than before. "You could have escaped without me." Cale shrugged, though she couldn't see it in the dim light. "I made a promise," he said simply. "Back in the arena. I told you we'd face this together. Promises mean something to me." Zareen absorbed his words, her chest tightening inexplicably. Loyalty was a concept she had rarely encountered, let alone experienced firsthand. It unnerved her, this strange sense of belonging she felt when he spoke. She didn't know how to process it, so she said nothing, allowing the silence to stretch once more. Hours passed, or perhaps it was days. Time had become irrelevant in the suffocating confines of the underground labyrinth. Hunger gnawed at their stomachs, and thirst left their throats parched, but neither complained. Survival required endurance, and they were determined to endure. When they finally emerged into the open air, the change was disorienting. The sky above was painted in hues of orange and purple, signaling either sunrise or sunset. It was impossible to tell which. They stood on the edge of a vast desert, the horizon stretching endlessly in every direction. Sand whipped around them in biting gusts, stinging their skin and blurring their vision. "This is it," Zareen said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "The edge of the known world. Beyond this point, there's nothing but wilderness." Cale shielded his eyes, squinting into the distance. "Nothing but opportunity," he corrected. "No rules, no expectations. Just us." Zareen turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. "And what happens when us isn't enough?" He met her gaze, his own unwavering. "Then we'll figure it out. Together." Her lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. Instead, she nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken pact between them. Whatever lay ahead, danger, discovery, or despair, they would face it side by side. With renewed determination, they stepped forward, leaving the remnants of their old lives buried beneath the sands. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a sea of golden dunes shimmering under the fading light of the twin suns. Cale and Zareen trudged forward, their steps heavy but resolute. The wind whipped around them, carrying with it the scent of dry earth and distant storms. Despite the harshness of their surroundings, there was an undeniable sense of freedom in the open expanse, a stark contrast to the suffocating confines of the arena and the labyrinthine tunnels they had escaped. 4 days, they walked without encountering another soul. Their supplies were meager. A few scraps of dried rations Zareen had salvaged from a hidden cache near the tunnel exit, but they shared what little they had, rationing carefully to ensure neither went hungry. Nights were cold, the temperature dropping sharply as soon as the suns dipped below the horizon. They huddled together for warmth beneath makeshift blankets fashioned from tattered cloaks, their bodies pressed close against the biting chill. It was during one of these quiet nights that Zareen finally broke the silence. "Do you ever wonder," she began hesitantly, her voice barely audible over the soft hum of the desert breeze, "if we've made a mistake?" Cale glanced at her, his expression thoughtful. "Leaving? No. Staying together? Definitely not." She sighed, staring up at the unfamiliar constellations scattered across the night sky. "I mean, do you think we can truly escape who we are? What we've done?" He reached out, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We're not running from who we are. We're choosing who we want to become." Her eyes met his, searching for doubt or hesitation. She found none. Instead, she saw only conviction, a quiet strength that seemed to anchor her whenever uncertainty threatened to pull her under. Slowly, she nodded, leaning into his touch. For the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't alone in bearing the weight of her past. As the days turned into weeks, the barren landscape began to shift subtly. Sparse patches of vegetation appeared, clinging stubbornly to life amidst the sand. Small creatures darted through the brush, their movements quick and cautious. One evening, as they set up camp near a cluster of gnarled trees, Cale spotted something unusual in the distance. Smoke spiraling lazily into the sky. "Fire!" he murmured, pointing toward the horizon. "Someone's out there." Zareen tensed immediately, her hand instinctively reaching for her blade. "Could be hunters," she warned, her voice low. "Or worse." Cale shook his head. "Or better. We won't know unless we check." After a brief debate, they decided to approach cautiously, keeping to the shadows as they drew closer. What they found was unlike anything either of them had expected. Nestled in a shallow valley surrounded by rocky outcrops was a small settlement, a collection of modest dwellings built from stone and wood. The air carried the scent of cooking food, and the faint sound of laughter drifted toward them. "They're human," Zareen whispered, her tone laced with disbelief. "How is this possible?" Cale frowned, equally surprised. "Maybe they're survivors. Refugees, like us." Before they could retreat, a figure emerged from one of the huts, spotting them almost immediately. It was an older man, his face lined with age but kind-eyed. He raised a hand in greeting, his posture relaxed and welcoming. "You look lost," he called out, his voice warm despite the distance. "Come. Share our fire." Exchanging a wary glance, Cale and Zareen stepped into the open, their weapons still close at hand. As they approached, more settlers appeared, curious but unthreatening. The old man introduced himself as Arinder, the leader of the community. He explained that the settlement had been founded by humans who had fled captivity, much like Cale, seeking refuge in the untamed wilderness beyond the reach of their oppressors. "We've learned to live off the land," Arinder said, gesturing to the fields of hardy crops and pens of livestock tucked away behind protective walls. "It's not easy, but it's ours." Zareen listened intently, her skepticism slowly giving way to awe. Here was proof that humanity, or any species, could thrive without violence, without domination. These people had built something beautiful from nothing, relying on cooperation rather than conquest. Over the next few days, Cale and Zareen stayed with the settlers, learning about their way of life. They were welcomed warmly, treated not as outsiders but as kin. For Cale, it was a homecoming of sorts, a reminder of what humanity could achieve when given the chance. For Zareen, it was a revelation. She spent hours speaking with the settlers, asking questions and absorbing their stories. Each conversation chipped away at the walls she had built around herself, replacing fear and mistrust with understanding and hope. One evening, as the sun set in a blaze of fiery hues, Cale found Zareen sitting alone atop a ridge overlooking the settlement. Her hair caught the dying light, glowing like molten gold. He approached quietly, sitting beside her without a word. "It's strange," she said after a moment, her voice tinged with wonder. "I came here thinking I knew everything, that my people were strong, and yours were weak. But now," she trailed off, shaking her head, "now I see how wrong I was." Cale smiled softly, nudging her shoulder playfully. Strong doesn't mean invincible. And weak doesn't mean powerless. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is choose peace over war. Zareen turned to look at him, her gaze filled with gratitude and admiration. "Thank you," she said simply, "for showing me that." He chuckled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You did most of the work yourself. I just pointed the way." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In that moment, surrounded by the promise of a new beginning, Kale and Zareen felt something they hadn't dared to hope for: peace. Not just the absence of conflict, but a deep, abiding sense of belonging, to each other, to the world around them, and to the future they would build together. Years later, the settlement had grown into a thriving village, its borders expanding as more refugees found their way to safety. Kale and Zareen became legends in their own right, not because of battles fought or enemies vanquished, but because of the lives they touched and the bridges they built. Together, they proved that even in a universe torn apart by hatred and division, compassion could heal wounds thought irreparable. And as they stood side by side, watching children laugh and play in the fields they had once helped sow, Kale took Zareen's hand in his, squeezing it gently. "This is it," he said, his voice filled with contentment. "Our happily ever after." Zareen smiled, her heart full. "Yes," she agreed. "It is."